Okay, great, thank you. Okay, I hope you can all see the presentation on the screen. Let me just get this. Okay, so thanks, Adam, for the introduction there. Okay, so my name is Respiratory Hygiene. So what we're talking today is about putting together a plan for return to work. So essentially, everything is governed around creating a plan, and I'm going to call that plan the response plan. So every business needs to prepare its own response plan for return to work. So what I'm talking about today, I've got about, I think just under 40 slides to get through with you today. So the intention is that at the end of it, you know, it should give you a pretty clear idea of exactly what you need to do in order to get your business fully prepared to get back to work confidently and meet the requirements and guidelines that are there at the moment. Okay, just to start off, just a caveat about what we're doing. Today is not about giving you legal advice. What we're trying to do today is just provide guidance for your business. So what's important to understand is that every business will need to develop its own tailored response. So you need to develop your own plan based around your own risk assessments, your own people, your culture, your building, etc. Certain types of businesses or organizations may need additional safeguards. So what today is not about is giving you a precise photograph image of everything you need to do, but rather the intention today is to walk through the guidelines, and at the end of it, I'm hoping that you'll feel you've got a good understanding of the guidelines and how you can apply them to your own individual business. So I just want to cover what I'm going to cover today. So let's just talk through the areas we're going to touch on over the next hour or so. So the first thing is, for me anyway, it's worth just reminding ourselves how the infection happens, and just quickly sort of, you know, go through that, because everything we're doing in terms of controls and preparation and planning is about stopping the transfer of infection. So let's just remind ourselves of the mechanisms of that. The second thing I have there is the response plan. So every business needs to produce its own response plan. It should be a written document, maybe not on paper, probably better to have it electronic these days. But yeah, you do need to generate your own response plan. So, and everything that's covered today is really the content that needs to be taken into account for that response plan. There are some really, really good tools available, for example, on the HSE website, that are freely available. So I'm going to touch on those. You may have seen those already, but I'll just briefly show you about those to make sure you know where you can get those. Like any good plan, communication is key. So mainly the issue we're dealing with is that some people, and I've seen this with some organizations, there is a genuine fear out there for some people about coming back to the office. So, and it's understandable. So communication is the key. It's really about understanding each individual employee's situation and how they can adapt, what flexibility they can offer. It's also about getting buy-in and commitment to the plan. So, you know, what better way is there to get that commitment than to have, you know, a good communication operating? So we need to build that in. Roles and there are designated roles and responsibilities, so we need to understand what they are. I think those roles and responsibilities are really crucial, because without them, there's a danger that the plan could fall by the wayside. One of the things we need to consider as business owners or managers is how long this needs to be in place. I suppose we all tend to form our own internal judgments. Everybody is monitoring the media. How worried should I be? How long will this go on? When can I return to the normal? This is what people kind of hear people saying. What I'm kind of recommending today from a planning point of view is, as businesses, we need to sort of think in terms of the longer term, because at the moment we don't actually know. We don't have a virus, a vaccination. We don't know how long this is going to be going on, or we don't know if there's going to be a second wave. We don't know if there's going to be another virus. So what we've got to do is really take the opportunity and plan now, so that we know our planning is robust from the start, it's working, but also that it can stand the test of time. and that it's responsive, etc. So I'll talk a little bit about that as we go through. Training. There are some training needs, and there's a lot of companies out there offering training at the moment already, but you need to think about who are the key people in the organization and what training they need. But what I'm going to focus on today as well is the induction, and each business does need to have its own induction for people returning to work, and that in a way is part of the training. So we'll talk about that, and it is part of the guidelines that this return to work induction does need to happen. Screening is about making sure that nobody who is infected comes into our building, whether it's an employee or somebody else who walks in and out of our building. Hygiene is about respiratory hygiene, hand hygiene, etc. These areas. And then we have our physical distancing, which is a key aspect of it. I know there's a lot of debate about that at the moment, but at the moment it is 2 meters. So at the moment, our obligation is to plan space for a 2 meter physical distancing. So we look at that, how we can best do that, and give a couple of suggestions there. Cleaning, we have certain changes to the way cleaning is happening at the moment. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands what the differences are. We need to look at a risk assessment, and every company should by rights carry out a risk assessment for the COVID-19 situation, or update your existing company risk assessment. So we'll just touch on that as well today. Managing teams and attendance is about looking at people that are coming into your teams of staff, and what's the best way to organize people in terms of rosters, and to avoid excessive buildup or clusters of people happening inside the building. A suspected case is a really important one, because it's of no interest or no importance until that moment comes along when suddenly an employee or somebody in the building says, I'm not feeling well, and I think the symptoms I have are, compatible with COVID-19. So all of a sudden, it's really, really important that there's a pre-planned response that kicks in at that moment. The last thing we want to do is to be scrambling around and not knowing what to do. And a key part of the guidelines is that we do have a procedure in place for this eventuality, that we know exactly what to do, and that there are assigned roles to deal with that situation. And tied in with that is the contact tracing, so that we know who may have become infected, who is in contact with that person. We'll talk about personal protective equipment, PPE, and then first aid, Legionella. HVAC refers to fresh air systems and how we're going to get fresh air into the building. The induction I've already touched upon, so it's important that every company has, so all employees who come back into the building must have an induction. So you have to give them an induction, and the induction is where you explain to them what the controls are, how the controls are operating in your particular business, and what they need to do to cooperate with all of that. So it's very, very important to sit down and actually formally tell people about that. And it also offers protection for your business as well, because in the event that something goes wrong in the future, the fact that we can be seen to, and we know, and it's recorded that we have actually told people what the controls are, what their responsibilities are, what they need to do. It makes sure that in the event of something going wrong, there's an insurance policy in a sense there that people have had it explained to them, and they have their responsibilities also. So lastly, monitoring the plan. We don't want to just create a plan and then put it on the shelf. We want to make sure that we can because we really don't know how long this is going to go on. So we really need to make some working assumption that it could continue on for quite a long time. So what we want to do, we don't want to just write a plan and leave it on the shelf. We want to check the plan, and we want to make sure the plan is current for the changing situation. Okay, so just very briefly, if I just start off, and I know everybody will say, well, we know all this, but it's worth just quickly reminding ourselves of what happens if there is an infected person in our building. And this is going to happen in some buildings over the next few months. It's hopefully not to us, but it could happen. We need to be ready for it. So if somebody breathes out, so we get droplets of infected fluid, they fall on surfaces around your space like a desk, and somebody touches those and then touches their eyes, nose, or mouth. So that's one method of transfer, just by touch and contact. The other one is by people through their breath. They exhale, we breathe in the air. Maybe they cough, maybe they laugh or talk. Another person breathes in that air and ingests the infection that way. So the other point is a lot of people just have mild symptoms and recover, but some have a serious illness, and particularly older people. Now, one of the concepts we need to be aware of in our planning is this one of vulnerable people. So these are people with conditions like diabetes and heart and lung disease. We have an obligation we need to identify those people and make sure that we are protecting them from risk, because they're particularly at risk. And just visually, so the guy in the middle here is coughing. All these little red dots are infected droplets of particles. They land here on the table, on the desk, or the phone, or in the retail environment, whatever it is. Somebody touches the phone, etc., etc. So the disease gets transferred person to person. So these are the mechanisms of transfer that we want to arrest and stop with our plan and with the controls that we're going to put into place. So in terms of the preparation, the main thing is to have a response plan. So if we just look at what's in the response plan, I just want to touch on the things that need to be included. Now I'll show you where you can find templates for this planning in a minute, just so that to make it easier to create your own plan. Excuse me. So a critical thing, and the thing I would really like to emphasize, is that it's really, really important to keep up to date with the latest government advice. There's really, really good information, I think, on ISME's website as well. There's also really good links, so you can go there and find the links. Or you can go to the HSE or HSA, that's the Health and Safety Authority website. And there is really, really good information there. So it's very, very helpful to have a look and take whatever is freely available on these websites. But the most important thing is that we keep our plan fresh. So we need to check our plan check the government information periodically. So perhaps weekly. It's worth over a cup of tea or coffee, take a bit of time, go back over, have a look at the HSA website and check if there's any new guidelines there that need to be incorporated into the plan as time goes on. And then consultation is really, really important, because this gives employees a chance people to raise concerns, but also give their feedback and input to the planning process. So it's all about, the plan is no good unless we get cooperation, support, commitment from the people that have to live with it day by day. So it's really great, like any planning, just to make sure that people are involved in the process as much as possible. Then control measures, we've got to identify the control measures. We look at those, what they're going to be. We look at our risk assessments. All of these are part of our planning. I would also recommend looking at existing documents, in particular existing fire escape plans. So we need to look at things like when the fire alarm goes off, we want to make sure that we don't have a situation where people are going out to a muster station, smoking a cigarette, having a chat, bunching up into small groups. So those plans should be updated to make sure they take account of physical distancing. And again, that's communicated to people. And equally, you might want to look at your safety statement, employee handbook, your general employee induction, separate to the COVID induction, for any new joiners, to make sure that they're getting inducted in the proper way. So these documents just need a look through and perhaps a refresh. Ensuring every worker completes a return to work form. So this is about screening and making sure that people are not coming into the building who are infected. And again, it forms part of our records. We're building up a body of documentation that if we have any kind of external audit or for any reason, we have the information there to show that these processes have been followed, and the records are there to show that that is the case. Assessing who can work from home, telling workers, I mean, these seem like obvious things, but it's important we do them, and you know that we ideally that we have some kind of record to show that yes, we've completed these steps. We need a trained worker representative, and that's a key individual who's a link with the worker team, and who takes up the role of communicating in both directions. We need to look at staff rosters depending on the number of people you have. Obviously, we want to work online and by phone where possible. We want to look at everybody who's coming into the building. This is suppliers, contractors, people for maintenance, anybody, the postman, whoever it is. Think about everybody who's coming in and make sure that we have a plan for how people are interfacing with the building to make sure that it's not going to create any risk. We're looking at reducing or eliminating business travel altogether if we can. Hygiene measures is really, really important, and we'll talk about that. Physical distancing. And also a final point is workers' stress and anxiety. It may be worth considering that, and there are some tools to give guidance about that from the HSA as well. So I thought it would be worth just showing you. So you may have seen this already, but there are really, really good documents here. So this is the HSA website. We have here, where I'm hovering my mouse at the moment, there's a thing called the COVID-19 response plan. So as a very quick way to kind of, if you haven't done so already, and you're looking for a good way to get going with your plan, that's a really, really good starting point there. So you can download that PDF. Anybody can download it, and that will give you a template structure for your plan. And again, the guidelines from the HSA are that every business must have their own response plan. So that's a really, really good starting point. You could take that and use that to begin to create your plan if you haven't done so already. Okay, just in terms of risk, it's probably, you may have seen this before, but quite often in safety training, we talk about something called the hierarchy of controls. And I thought it would be good just to remind ourselves of this today. So what's interesting here is that PPE, are things like gloves and face masks, is down at the very bottom. So that's the least effective. We often think that, PPE is, we put on our PPE and, we're protected and that's the end of it. But that's not what we're seeing here, because actually what's much more effective is elimination up on the top. So if we eliminate the risk from happening in the first place, it's a highly effective way of dealing with hazard and risk. PPE is actually the least effective way of dealing with it. So when we talk about PPE, it's worth just keeping this in the back of our mind, that PPE is really the defense of last resort, and that there are better ways of dealing with it. Of course, PPE has its place, but it needs to be used properly and according to the prescribed times when it should be used. So in terms of the hierarchy of controls then, so the best way of eliminating the risk is at source. So again, we want, and according with the guidelines, people should work from home where possible. Where that's not possible, we need to redesign our working practices to make sure it's safe for people to be working inside the building. So number two, meetings, training should be carried out online. What we don't want to do is have situations where we're telling people to get together in a small room to work together. That's the kind of thing we want to avoid. So it's about replanning the way we're working to give people more space to have ventilation, etc. We want to minimize the need for business trips, essential only. Again, if we're using cars, travel alone in cars, or there's other measures such as diagonally opposite, windows open, etc. So these are some of the considerations. So if we think about the controls, essentially there are three main areas of control. One is the 2-meter distancing rule, and the other is hand hygiene, and the other is respiratory hygiene. So in simple terms, those are the three areas that we need to be making sure we're controlling in our workspace. So in terms of physical distance, again, eliminate the hazard if we can, work from home where we can. What you need to do is look at your building in terms of the 2-meter rule, and I'm sure you've thought about this already, but certainly do, if possible, get a layout drawing of your floor and get a pen and paper and sort of mark out how you're going to manage and look at the areas where it's difficult to maintain a 2-meter distance between people, and see if you can figure out ways that you can keep that distancing happening. So you might want to consider changing the layout of your space, circulation routes, corridors, stairs, access, egress, etc. Your toilets, your kitchen, your breakout, where people are eating their coffee and their sandwich, and how that's going to work. So all of these things need to be looked at. You can put in floor markings. You can either buy the stickers, or you can just simply use red tape and stick it to the floor or something. Just make sure it doesn't wear away after a while, that you keep it maintained so that with signage so that it's clear. We can also look at rearranging our working times, like shifts and breaks, perhaps having people going on breaks at different times, just common sense to reduce the number of people going into a kitchen area. Meetings online as far as possible. And again, let's think about who's coming into our building, the customers walking in, suppliers coming in, contractors, maintenance people, the postman, whatever it is. How are all these things going to work? Another question to ask is, can we release other space around our building? Are there rooms that we don't really use, or maybe a kind of a storage room that's full of junk that we could quickly clear out and make that into another office for one person to take pressure off, physical space pressure off another area? So there may be opportunities there. So again, if we just look at a very simple situation here, we have 4 people at a desk, so we take away 2 and also take away the chairs, so that the chairs are there. It's no longer possible for people to sit side by side. And we've checked that between these 2 people, there's a 2-meter physical distancing. This is one that we did recently with an organization. So basically, I think it's good if you have a floor plan like this, to print it off, and you can see what we've done here. We've actually marked each of the rooms. So down here we're saying 1 person maximum, 3 people maximum allowed in here. So this office here would have originally had 7 people working in it, but now we're saying that only 3 can use that particular room at the moment. We've also changed the flow of people through the building. So we have access coming in through one area, egress through another area. So we get circulation happening in one direction rather than having people going up and down the stairs, which makes it difficult for people at physical distance. So by printing off your floor map, if you have one, and sort of, taking a little bit of time, you can look and you can decide how to better use your space, just to sort of manage the situation we're facing at the moment. So if we think about then working times and shifts, again, engage with people and speak to them, understand the willingness and the flexibility that people are able to offer. Obviously, it's good if we, rather than imposing something, if we can show an effort to flex the business or to meet the needs of the person as much as we can within reason. So it's worth exploring that. For a larger organization, we've actually done this in a couple of companies. An employee survey is a really good idea, because you can get a lot of information back about people's ability to work flexibly from home, etc. And we want to create teams that can consistently work together. So we don't want to keep blending different people every day. If we can put a group of 3 people, they come in at 9 o'clock every morning, leave at 5, the same people come back in the next day. So we're not kind of constantly churning different people into kind of closer spaces together. These are the kinds of strategies that are working well. Now, it's not always possible to maintain a 2-meter physical distance. If we can't, then we need to install physical barriers like we see around the place in retail at the moment, perspex sneeze guards, for example, minimize contact as far as possible, and back up with sanitizing and hand washing aids. But bearing in mind, from our hierarchy of controls, elimination is the best way of eliminating and managing the risk. Okay, I'll just, after that, I'll just take a moment and see if anybody has any questions.
There's none in the chat, Raftery. So if people want to unmute themselves and ask a question now, please do so. If not, we'll carry on. We'll just give it a minute.
I might have a question.
Super, go ahead.
Okay, I just want to ask if, let's say that we have people working from home at the moment, but we also have people who are working, during the whole situation. Do they need to fill out the return to work form as well, or is that something which only, applies to people who are working from home and will be coming back to work?
Yeah, so the return to work, thank you for the question, Casey. No, the return to work form is just only for people that are coming back into the building. Okay. So the thing that you probably don't want to do is to fill out the form, say this week, and then they don't come back for a further sort of couple of months or something. So the best way to use that form is to get them to fill it out perhaps in the week before they come back, close to the time that they're coming back. So you're getting their answers based on recent contact they have or any recent symptoms. Otherwise, the information would get out of date. So fairly recent to the time they're coming back is the best.
Okay, but the people who are actually were working the whole time, they don't have to fill it in.
No, if they're working from home and they're not coming back and there's no contact with anybody in the building, in the business premises, it's not needed to fill it in. It's only when they're coming back.
Oh no, but what I'm saying is there is people who are actually working in the building at the moment.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, so those people don't have to fill out the form because they're working through the whole time.
Yeah, pardon me. No, I think I would, no, in that case, I would get them to fill out the form.
Okay.
Because you need to formally capture whether they have any symptoms or they've been in contact with anybody. So I would view that as part of your record keeping, that you want to have it in your records, that they filled in the form. They haven't been in contact with somebody. So yeah, definitely I would get them to fill in the form in that case.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Kazia. Anyone else for a question? We'll press on if not.
I'm just going to add on, sorry, Orla here.
Hi, Orla.
That form, hi everybody. That form, we actually use, well, we haven't got people returning to work, people remote working staff, but I'm actually going to be using that risk form for people who actually return to work, even if after sickness during this COVID. So it means that that form would be effectively used over and over again in different situations.
Yep.
Because it needs to be. Yeah, and my second thing was, if you're in a situation where we don't have a way, we've only one way in and we've one way out, and that's it, other than using the emergency fire exit doors. But then you're not meant to be using those exits, or can you?
Well, that's something that I think you need to negotiate that on a building by building basis. So it would be worth asking whoever, if there's a building manager around, it depends on your situation, but it would be worth looking into that, because if you are, sometimes those doors are alarmed. So if they're alarmed, that could be an issue, but it would be worth finding out if you could use them, because it's so valuable. If you can get the one-way system going, it might override whatever negatives there are or reasons not to use the door. So much better if you can actually use the escape door and get your one way going.
But from a health and safety perspective, it's okay. That's what I was wondering, because it's not alarmed, but it's a fire door. You know, it's just an fire exit door, but it's okay to use it.
Yeah, I mean, there should be absolutely no reason why you can't use the door. I mean, the door is there to be used, and there's a very, very good reason for using it. So no, there's no reason specifically from a health and safety that you can't go out that way. Just normally it's discouraged, you know, if it's not an escape situation, but if it can be used, and if it's your own, I don't know if it's your own building or how it works, but yeah, you can certainly use it.
Thanks, thank you.
And Orla, am I right in thinking you're in healthcare, is that right?
No, I'm in a sort of laboratory consumables and equipment. That's our area. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, so your laboratory is obviously going to be your place of focus, which I assume is probably fairly busy at the best of times.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. No, I was just interested to know which line you were in, because the sector-driven stuff is, as Raftery said, you know, they'll be different for a small shop owner and a cafe owner, for example. Whilst they're both retail, there will be different nuances. So we'll break those down into sectors over the coming weeks. So
okay.
If there aren't any more questions, I'll hand back to Raftery. Any more? No, I think we're good to go. Okay, Raftery, back to you.
Okay. So again, just in terms of hand washing, you know, the thing about hand washing is we all wash our hands all the time. But what's different now is we need to make sure that people are washing their hands in the prescribed way. So it's worth your while as part of your return to work induction just to make sure that everybody is told the correct way of washing their hands. There's a video on the HSA website that you can use if you want to. But it's just making sure that people are, when they are washing their hands, that they're getting the value out of it and that it's actually achieving what it's supposed to be doing in terms of managing the spread of infection. So as a lot of us have heard, hand washing is better than sanitizing. So you want to set up your dispenser points around your building, for example, at entry and exit points. But again, what we've done in a couple of companies is we look at the floor layout and agree with the staff what are all the best places, and then fit them. And also make sure there are wash hand basins around if possible, where people can wash their hands. There are paper towels there, there's soap, etc. For some companies, we've been able to get dispensers recently. They're not terribly expensive. They're elbow operated, so you don't have to, be touching the surface as you're taking the sanitizer. So again, it's about telling workers about the importance of hand washing and how critical it is to managing the spread of infection. Tell people as well about when to do it. So it's before and after eating, after coughing and sneezing, and after using the toilet. And again, in terms of posters, there's a whole lot of posters on the HSA website. They can be downloaded for free. So I think I have one on the next page. So there's one that I downloaded from the HSA website. So you can print that up as an nice A3 and laminate it or whatever you want to do. And you may have done some of this stuff already, but if you haven't, there are all kinds of great posters there. So do go and have a look and download those for yourselves. The respiratory hygiene, and again, we need to be telling people about this, so we can use the induction as a formal way to tell people. We have the posters to reinforce the message about respiratory hygiene. We need to make sure that we have tissues around. We want to have bins there, ideally pedal operated bins, and empty the bins regularly. Obviously, we don't need the bins overflowing, so there needs to be cleaning procedures in place to take the waste away before it becomes a problem, and make the tissues widely available. Just carry on there. So personal protective equipment is PPE. Now, the first thing about PPE is it should be based on your risk assessment. So identify what, and I'll show you, for those of you, some of you may be familiar with risk assessments, but we'll just touch on that briefly in a while. So we need to identify what types of PPE are needed and in what quantities. So make sure that we have enough in stock. And again, this will be based on our risk assessment. We need to tell people and make arrangements for cleaning, inspecting, maintaining and disposing of PPE. So if I have gloves or if I have a face mask, what do I do after I've used it? So this again is part of the induction. It's part of what we need to tell people, and we need to have these procedures operating in our environment. Train workers about how to fit them. For example, face masks need to be fitted properly, when to use them, and disposal. Gloves, there's been a lot of talk about gloves. Gloves are not a substitute for hand hygiene, and we should wash hands thoroughly before and after use. So again, these are the messages that need to be communicated to employees. Okay, so if we talk about cleaning, so cleaning has changed, and there are additional cleaning steps that we need to take now over and above what we would normally do. So in the guidelines, there's a difference between cleaning and disinfecting. So typically now, in our business environment, what we want to do is start off by cleaning with warm water and soap to clean off the germs and impurities, but then we disinfect. So that's where we wipe down with a dilute bleach or chemical, and we kill the germs on the surface. So the main focus and the main difference that's changed now is that we want to clean frequently touched surfaces. The recommendations in the guidelines are that these frequently touched surfaces should be cleaned twice a day. So that, that potentially is quite a job that needs to be done depending on the size of a building. So it's worth seeing how you might be able to comply with that. So surfaces and objects in public places, shopping carts, point-of-sale keyboards should be cleaned and disinfected before use. And then in a sort of office environment, tables, doorknobs, light switches, countertops, things like phones, taps in toilets, sinks, these are all the things that we're touching all the time. So these now we need to look and see how we can clean them more frequently than we would have done before. And the recommendation is twice per day for all those areas. So for frequently touched surfaces, we need to have a cleaning plan in place and write that down, make that part of your plan. Keep them visibly clean and wipe them down at least twice per day. In terms of waste disposal, another area to think about, we want to have no-touch bins where possible. You can see the one in the photograph is a pedal bin. We're able to buy these for about 35 euros each at the moment. So they are available. Empty them regularly when they're about 3/4 full. And make sure we're disposing of waste cloths and wipes, mop heads and disposable cords to be cleaned before reuse. So essentially, part of our plan is that we put in place a plan for all the cleaning aspects. And that plan is made part of our procedures. It's communicated to our cleaners. They know what they're supposed to do. The staff know what's happening, and everything is working as it should. Buckets need to be emptied and refreshed before each use. Yeah, sorry. Okay, if the building's been empty for a long time, consider a deep clean if returning to work. So that's cleaning all of these surfaces. And we mentioned that washrooms and surfaces to be cleaned twice a day. Keep the supplies of cleaning materials in stock and train staff in the new cleaning arrangements. Okay. Just check if there's any questions on that.
Sorry, another question. Hi, it's Laura again. I have the video from the HSA on cleaning the doctor's surgery, and it basically shows that you just leave the premises basically for an hour, and then you go in and you just clean, but then you can start straight away and do your work. Is there any particular restrictive time if you feel that somebody has actually, sneezed COVID onto a surface? There's nothing really laid down by the HSA, is there?
No, I don't think there's anything specifically laid down. There is talk about leaving the room for a period of hours, like you say, but no, we don't have. Apart from the guidelines that on surfaces like plastic, they talk about 72 hours. There is a 72 hours. I think it's 72 hours as well for waste. So, for example, if there's a case of infection, the waste should be double bagged and left for 72 hours before it's brought down and thrown into the waste. So in those cases, they do stipulate a period of time. But for a case of an infection, they haven't said about about waiting a particular time to clean the room. Although, having said that, I mean, common sense would say that if you can leave the room for, several hours or a day before cleaning it, then that would be preferable.
Okay. It's just in the HSA, the video is cleaning a doctor's visit room, and it's only an hour, so we assume that we can do the same.
Yeah, I would say you could assume. I mean, they haven't specified for cleaning an isolation room the case, so you could in theory go in and clean it straight away, but probably best to wait a while, like you say, if you can.
Yeah, thank you.
Any more questions, guys, for Raftery? No, it doesn't sound like it, Raftery. We'll carry on, thanks.
Okay. So just a reminder on our risk assessment. So the best way to do our risk assessment is to, first of all, so on the column here on the left, we have a hazard. So you may be familiar with this, but I'll just quickly go through it. So a risk assessment is all about identification of hazard. We are told that as part of our return to work planning that we should carry out a risk assessment. So this is an example of a risk assessment for another organization for COVID-19. So you can see the way it's structured, and it's a good system. It's a good way of structuring a risk assessment. So on the left-hand column, we have identified what the hazard is. Then we have scored the hazard based on the likelihood and severity. And the likelihood and severity here, we can see the severity goes from a 1 to a 5. So 1 is, trivial or minor. and 5 is almost certain death. So we have a severity from 1 to 5, so we can score that way, and then we have likelihood or probability along the top. So you can rank your hazard according to those, and then multiply the two together, and that gives you your score. So your score could either be in the green zone, it could be in the amber zone, or the red zone. So it gives you an indication of how high the level of risk is associated with a given hazard. So we have our hazard, we have our likelihood and severity, we've given those a score, and then we multiply the two together, and that gives us the overall score. And in this case, I've put them in red because they multiply up to a number value that puts them in the red zone. So that tells me that it's a pretty serious hazard. And then last but not least, on the right-hand side, what I've done is I've thought about what the controls are and what the things that I'm actually going to implement in order to control that risk. So it gives you a systematic way to go through. And again, and this is where your PPE use comes from as well, because it could be that part of your control is the use of PPE. So again, you can list that here, and that gives you your recommendations as to when to use your PPE. Okay, so in terms of our plan, obviously we want to consult and engage with staff. We need to have the return to work induction, which is directly, we're instructed to do that in the HSA guidelines. Tell staff what the signs and symptoms to look out for are. They should know that. Complete the screening form, vulnerable people, and also considering people coming into the building from the outside. Yeah, okay, so these are the items that we need to cover in the induction. We want our return to work protocols. We want to tell people about the controls, and that was the physical distancing, hygiene, and cleaning. What to do if somebody develops symptoms is another thing we need to cover. The contact log, and then emergency escape procedure changes. So these are items that can be covered. There's also the checklist, the HSA checklist, and they do have one of the 7 checklists relates to the induction. So I would definitely download that if you haven't done so already, and have a look at that documentation. Okay, so what do we do if somebody actually develops the symptoms? So the key thing is to have a pre-planned procedure in place. We need to have one of the managers nominated to deal with the occurrence if it happens. So we need to know who that person is at a managerial level. We need to have a response team set up. So we want some members of staff who know what to do and how to deal with the situation. We need to have a designated isolation room. So the isolation room, it doesn't have to be empty the whole time. It could be a room that's an office or something. But if in the event that somebody becomes infected, the room can be taken over and used as an isolation room quickly. It should ideally have windows to the outside so it can be ventilated. And you need to put in some PPE, for example, face masks, tissues and bins need to be in there. So if the person goes in there, they can put on a face mask. If they're sneezing, they have tissues, and they can sit in the room until such time as they can be removed, helped to leave the building. In terms of where they go, we need to make sure that they don't go to their GP. They can phone their GP, but then it's a case of perhaps being driven somewhere. But again, a plan needs to be put into place about how to get them to where they need to go, probably to their own house in the first case. They ring their GP. The GP may decide on a test or no test. Then depending on that, they follow on from there. You ought to also consider if there's more than one case. So if 2 people get sick at the same time, you may need to consider having a second isolation room as well. And then again, in some of the companies we've been working with, we've done this, and we have 2 isolation rooms. Both of them are set up because it could be that only one of the 2 people with symptoms is actually infected. So you don't want to put the 2 of them into the same room, because then there's the risk the other person could become infected. And we spoke about this with Orla a moment ago, but then we clean and disinfect the isolation area afterwards. And again, it might be a case of bringing in an external cleaning company to do this if staff don't want to do it. And then finally, we follow up with the person. So, and the critical thing is, did they have a test? And if they did have a test, did they test positive? Because if they did, that's where contact log comes into place, we need to know who else they were in contact with, and then check with those people to see if we need any follow-up action with them. So in terms of the contact log, each employee needs to have their own contact log and maintain that of the people they are in contact with. And again, that's something that should be addressed in the induction. Any questions at the moment?
None in the chat room there, Raftery.
Yeah, I have another question. Orla has two questions.
Yes,
so one is,
go ahead, Orla.
because we're only a small company, a very, very small company. So I was advised by an occupational health and safety nurse that there's no need to have a contact log. All I need to do is just inquire in the past 2 days with the person who they have been in contact with in the company, and just have that information at hand for the HSE, just in case they're looking for it. And the second thing I was going to ask you was the risk assessment. We don't use a scoring system. We just use simplified low, medium, and high, because scoring is too difficult. So is that okay?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, in terms of the form, I mean, my answer to you on that one, Orla, because it is part of the HSA guidelines, I would tend to use it and follow the guidelines from the HSA. For the contact log, I think it's worth having it. It's a little bit onerous, but you know, I don't know. It's up to each organization to decide for themselves what is acceptable. But I think the fact that it's spelled out in black and white, you know, that you should have a contact log, I would tend to do it for the moment anyway. So I think that would be my suggestion to you.
It's just very difficult to police that, you know, especially when you have remote workers. Most of our people are remote. Yeah,
well, in terms of remote workers, it would be, you know, it's going to be a different situation. They're not that it's more their own responsibility if they're remote. They're not actually, you know, it's not people in the office where the situation is arising. So for remote workers, it may be that it's less of a requirement. But certainly, if they're coming into the office, I would definitely tell everybody that they do need to keep the contact log, because the danger is if they don't have it and something happens, they'll forget who they were in contact with, and you know, all the names won't be written down.
I have a question. Can I ask a question as well? My question would be, when you said remote workers, so you're saying that they don't have to fill up the COVID-19 logbook if they're not coming to the premises. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think if they're remote, no, they don't necessarily need to fill it in.
Okay, and what in case if the person is working remotely, but then it comes, let's say, once a month to the premises? So, like, obviously they will have to fill the COVID-19 log then, but from how many days before? 14?
No, it isn't specified how many days before they need to fill in the log. So we don't have a number on that. If they are coming into the office at all, then they should really complete the log continuously and have it as a running log.
Okay.
Any other questions, guys? Thank you, Kazia and Orla, for your questions. Any others?
I actually have one more. When you were saying about the return to work form, so let's say that person comes back every month, once a month, which is working remotely from home. So it means that every single month I have to send her again a return to work form to check if everything is okay.
You don't have to. You don't have to fill it in every month. I think once you do it once and you have the form filled in, what I would recommend to you is that you write on the form, which they sign, that if they develop any symptoms or if any of the above changes, that they advise or they report to their manager and let them know. So if they develop symptoms or if they've been in contact with somebody who has COVID, then they tell the manager that that's the case. They report it to the manager. Okay. I think if this situation goes on for a year or you know, a long period of time, then it would be worth perhaps every several months of reissuing the form and getting people to fill it in again, because a long period of time has gone by.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, Raftery, it's Mary here. I'm just wondering about what is the definition of contact. So I'm a self-employed and I see clients on a one-to-one basis, so I'm prepared in terms of that as a contact. But when I go into the building, there may be somebody in the hallway, or there's other offices or other businesses within the same building. There's a communal area for preparing tea or coffee. So if I meet somebody in the hallway and I'm just sort of saying hello and we're standing 2 meters apart, is that considered a contact, or is there a time if it's longer than a certain time? Is that how it works?
Well, there isn't actually a definition of what contact is, so we don't know. And a lot of these guidelines, when you really go down into the detail, there is another level of questions that are not addressed by the guidelines. So in a sense, I think the answer is that it varies from business to business. And I think really you need to kind of apply your common sense to it and say, if you think that there's a risk of infection, obviously, it may be that somebody walks in and out of the building, you're not near them, etc. But if you are close to somebody, if you're in a kind of a confined space, if there isn't ventilation, there's a higher risk of a transfer of some kind of infection. So it's really down to looking at the individual situation and deciding what is a contact. Certainly, if you're close to somebody in the same room as them, I think that would be a contact. If you're spending a bit more time with somebody in the same spaces, that would be a contact. If somebody is coming in and you have dealings with them, even if you're 2 meters apart, that might be a contact. So there isn't a hard and fast rule exactly what it is, but I think it's a matter of just looking at your own day-to-day and seeing who's coming into your sphere every day. And I suppose the rule is going to be, if in doubt, just put the person down on the list and note them down as a contact.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah. And I think the other thing about the contact list, just to mention, is that obviously as time goes by, we can sort of delete it. So the contact list from a month ago is no longer relevant because, the infection would have kind of burnt out in that person anyway by that time. So we don't have to keep records continuously. We can just keep the records for, set a cutoff period of, for example, 4 weeks, and we don't have to hold information any longer than that period of time.
I just want to add to that. I read somewhere, if you have a visitor in your premises and they're inside your premises for longer than 15 minutes, you're meant to record that. Is that correct?
I haven't actually seen anything about, recording somebody in there for more than 15 minutes. So I haven't come across that myself. Having said that, I mean, there is a lot of debate about this issue of duration. So, but people are saying, well, if you're in contact with somebody, even if you're 2 meters apart, but you're with them for a long time, does that matter? And, I think the answer is yes, it does matter. And it does have an effect how long we're with people. But it's not at the moment in the guidelines. There's nothing in the guidelines about duration. It's only about physical distancing.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I think, yeah, if there's a last question here, we'll move on to the next section. No, I think we're okay, Raftery. Back to you again.
Okay, thanks. So another item that we were asked to check is just drinking water. So if anybody has been out of their building for a long time, just check your tanks for Legionella if the water hasn't been flowing. The last thing we want is another health crisis. So if water has been flowing the whole time, less of a concern. But if water has been sitting stagnant, particularly drinking water, then just be careful of that one. The other one is to consider fresh air supply. So if you're in a building, if you're in an office type situation, if you look up in your ceiling, there are grills in the ceiling. Some of those systems bring in fresh air and some don't. So it's worth just checking and finding out if there's a company that comes in and maintains your system. Just try to find out if they actually introduce fresh air into the building. Fresh air obviously is another way of mitigating the risk of spread of infection. And the other way of bringing in fresh air, of course, is to open windows. So opening windows, and this ties in with the idea of duration and people being in rooms together, even if they're 2 meters apart. If windows can be opened, obviously that's going to help. It's going to keep the air clearer. So if you can, at this time of the year, if windows can be kept open, all the better. Filters might need to be changed in air handling systems if you have them. So just something to keep an eye on. I think I'm getting near the end here now, but the one thing really to kind of do, once we create this plan, this response plan, the next thing is just to check that the plan is working effectively. And in particular, just to keep an eye on the government guidelines. So these are some of the key websites here. We have gov.ie, HSE, hpsc.ie. The HSA in particular is really good. The NSAI have a document they produced as well, which you may have seen, but worth a look. The one from the NSAI deals with the whole issue of cleaning out a room where there has been an infection. So if that's something you're looking for more information on, then I'd recommend having a look at the NSAI document. If we do change the plans, let's make sure to tell employees that the plans have been adjusted. One thing you could have is a simple checklist where you walk around every week and just do a tick and a check that your plan is working well. Note anything that's not working well and what improvements need to be made for any areas that aren't working. And that provides an audit for later on if needed to show that we have a kind of a living system that's adapting and improving as time goes on. So if you find any improvements, obviously build those into the plan as well. And in terms of how long the plan will be in place, at the moment we don't know. But probably until a vaccine emerges, whenever that is. So we may have to live with this social distancing and these regimes continuously until we get a vaccination. So the recommendation is that we try to build a good, strong and robust plan from the beginning. It could be there for 6 months, it could be there for a year, we don't know. So we want to make sure the plan is good enough at the start that it continually updates, it gets refreshed. We have an ongoing way of communicating with employees and taking feedback. And adjust the plan to any new guidelines from the agencies. So there it is. So I think again, I just want to emphasize that we're talking about guidelines today. It's not exhaustive, but what we want to do is just provide the guidelines to you today to help you to set up your own plan. So, okay. Are there any questions at all?
That was very, very, very interesting and very, very useful. Thank you very much, Raftery. Actually, I've got a question, if I can kick off. When we went into remote working 3 months ago, we set up a remote working WhatsApp. Now, we've got a small team, we're 10 people, but we set up a WhatsApp. Would a WhatsApp, would a group for your employees, would that, and it's a COVID specific sort of COVID management WhatsApp, would that be considered a sufficient audit trail for the HSA, Raftery?
I'm not sure that it would. I'm not sure on that one, Adam. I think in terms of a HSA audit trail, I think the most robust thing is to make sure that everything that they've asked for in their documentation, that we have documentation to back that up. So things like having a documented response plan is going to be a very, very strong piece of evidence that there's a robust plan in place. Having a signed record that people have attended and understood the induction is a very, very strong piece of record evidence that certainly I would want to have in place. I mean, what I'm thinking is that imagine in 6 months, somebody has become infected and they're saying, well, I got infected at work and the controls weren't very good and nobody cared whether you washed your hands or not. And there was very little attention paid to it. So I think this is one area where we need to be quite careful. So I think we need to up the level from something like a WhatsApp group and really have formalized documents in place that are good quality, robust documents where we have an induction sign off from the employee and we keep all of those documents as part of our record set. I think that's the direction we need to be going in, rather than say, WhatsApp messaging.
So it has to be a very robust system, like to sort of introduce it as an SOP to your existing SOPs, your standard operating procedures.
Yeah, very much so. And I think for any companies that have, for example, ISO 9001 implemented, and I've already had that experience, this document can be viewed as a system just like that, and very much can be organized along the same lines as an ISO system or an extension to it.
Super. Okay. Any questions, guys? Just feel free to unmute yourself.
Can I just ask a final question? This is Orla. I just want to know about people who are vulnerable in terms of if they're not submitting, and I don't want to know their medical reasons why. Do I just say, look, go to your doctor and back it up? Because I don't want to be dealing with people's health records, number one. And number two is I've got people who are actually over 70 and actually work in the building because they're the owners. So I can't tell them to go and cocoon at home.
No, you can't. I think, Orla, in that situation, really, it's about if you do have vulnerable people, as best you can, it's about making sure that the behaviors and the controls are in place as far as possible, that they're not at risk, they're not in contact, that they're complying with the controls, that they're physically distancing, and they're protecting themselves as best you can possibly do. But it's a difficult situation. You can't obviously tell them to stay at home. So it's about putting in the controls as best you possibly can in the workspace to make sure their risks are being controlled and minimized.
Thank you.
Great. Any more, guys? Any more questions? Silence. I think you've answered everyone's questions there, Raftery, during the presentation, which I have to say I thoroughly enjoyed, and I learned an awful lot from it, and I hope you guys did too. So just want to say a big thank you to you, Raftery, for your time and the effort that you put in to pull this slide deck together as well. That was very thorough, and as I said before, this is recorded, so we will send out a recording to you so you can go over parts that perhaps weren't clear to you. Feel free to contact me. I can put you in contact with Raftery for any assistance, further assistance. Raftery, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for tuning in, everyone. And we will be running more of these, so keep an eye out on our learning page at isme.ie/learning. That's where we're putting these business advisory clinics together, and we're addressing sort of the very much changing mindset, the weekly changing mindsets and the demands that are required from businesses. So thank you, Raftery. You ticked so many boxes there.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Take care now.